our association to meet us. I welcome Mr. Mr. Premji doesn't require any introduction, but still to make a few points. So Premji has been on the helm of the Wipro from 1960, starting from hydrogenated oils, now to IT, BPO empire. He spread in 58 countries. But the reason that we have him with us is because of his philanthropy and development which he is doing. He has a very keen interest, and he has taken on this Wipro foundation, which is handling the school education, improving the education in public schools. The Wipro Foundation is involved in it, and quite a few of our officers are also involved in this school education program. This foundation was started by Mr. Azim Premji, and he has generously contributed to the foundation. A study by WealthX and Business Insider. According to the study, Mr. Premji is the fourth largest donator in the world, and that too for his hallmark has been, though he has been such a philanthropist, but this is all done quietly, without any publicity. He shuns publicity. Apart that, we are very honored that he has accepted our invitation. Normally, people say that we have pulled off a coup for inviting and Mr. Premji accepting our invitation. So, without delaying this lecture, we will start the proceedings. Mr. Khawla, he will be the moderator for this today's talk.
We can have some introductory remarks from you for about 15 minutes, and after that we can have some questions and answers from the audience also, and that's how we would like to proceed, sir. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would request to Mr. Azim Premji, sir, to begin his talk.
Good evening. Can you hear me? I don't think the mic is working. Evening to all of you all. It's a pleasure to be here. And, the traffic in Bangalore is getting horrendous. It took us an hour and a half from our office to come here. And we had a meeting with the Minister George in the afternoon to emphasize to him how bad Sajapur Road is getting. And he said the total budget allocation for it is 3.9 crores, which is enough to pave it on one surface. Anyway, we are pursuing it with him because the traffic in Bangalore is going to come to a stop unless something drastic is done. It's really very, very bad. But that's not the subject of my talk, unfortunately. I want to share with you my experience, which I had about 2 weeks back. I spent a full week, a Sunday through a Saturday, visiting the villages and visiting the schools in northeast Karnataka, Gulbarga district, Yadgir district and Bijapur district. We do a lot of work in that area in our foundation, and we employ over 130 people there full time, working with the schools, working with the teachers, working with the state functionaries, working with the district institutes of education and training. Our foundation has been in education, government education, because we only work with government schools. We only work with government schools in 7 states, in the most undeveloped part of those states. We don't work with private schools. And we've been doing that for 15 years. About 5 years back, we set up a university, a not-for-profit university, in the area of education and community development. This year we've added bachelor's courses. Up to now we were just using master's courses. And about a year and a half back, we established a special branch in our foundation for supporting NGOs in the area of nutrition, in the area of education of people, the dedication of people who are in education, both in the state functionaries, the teachers, the head teachers, and our team which works with them. Uh, Hundred teachers, or more than 100 teachers in these various schools, because we have these teacher training workshops which we organize in the schools, where teachers from a aggregation of villages come on their own time and attend it. I met a girl of about 15 years in one of the schools. She was determined to join the police. So you have a ready-made recruitment now for your IPS. I heard many things from her, including the instance where she was confronted by a man who was harassing her and the way she tackled him. And the fact that she got support to the person to task. So the credit was both to her for her courage and to the NGO which was dedicated to preventing harassment of women in that village. She comes from a very disadvantaged family. She comes from a very poor family. But she had the spirit and the confidence of somebody totally beyond her background. It was very, very admirable. Let me talk about a second example, which again was very, very heartening. I met hundreds of teachers from the very villages in which we were working. And they used to come on their own time after school hours, because during school hours they teach, for group meetings, basically with the objective of enhancing their skills, sharing best practices, using the facilities which we have created there of computers for self-learning. And they did this on their own time, and they did it on weekends. And for instance, we are a reasonably well-run company, but we cannot get any of our software engineers to come on their own time at their own cost on a weekend. Weekend is private to them. And these were the school teachers who were devoting, after long hours of work, time from 4 in the evening to 7, 8 in the evening, coming in on a Saturday, just because they had a sense of the importance of their job. A sense because they considered what they were doing very important for their society, very important for their children. It was very, very encouraging. And they were about 20% of the teachers in the villages which we were working were doing this. And we had only started this initiative about 2 years back. And that number of people was rapidly increasing. And our experience was that about 10 to 20% of them were exceptional teachers, really exceptional teachers. 10 to 20% of them were write-offs as teachers. They were not dedicated, they were not sincere. But the balance 60% were people who could be turned around if they were given the right amount of motivation, the right amount of encouragement, the right amount of support. So 80% of the teachers in government schools were potentially people, in our experience, who were dedicated to improving the way they taught the children. Were dedicated to being more sincere in their job. Were dedicated to learning more about their jobs. And that was very, very heartening. These two instances give me a strong judgment that the situation, even in the poorest of villages, with all the defects of the government systems in education, all the lapses of the government system in education, can be turned around. And we can get ordinary people to perform extraordinary tasks. That's very, very fundamental, that you can get ordinary people to perform extraordinary tasks. There is no question that the level of education in primary, in upper secondary, in lower secondary needs to be improved. But so does it need to be improved in private schools. And our experience was that the government schools are giving a better quality education than the private schools in the villages. The private schools in the villages pay 1/3 the salary of a government school. The only reason that they are flourishing is because they teach in English and because it's a status symbol in a village for a mother to send her child to a private school. That's the only two reasons. Though the mother herself knows, because many of them are teachers themselves, that the quality of education their child gets is equal to or inferior to the quality of education the child gets in her own schools. You know, your constituency of being in the IAS gives you a very good grassroots feel of what is happening in the field. I mean, that's natural to your profession, that's natural to the jobs which you do, particularly when you are in the villages of the country. And it is very important that we have a sense of optimism in terms of what we can achieve. We have a sense of being able to support ordinary people in terms of what they can achieve, and that we work with the system with a high degree of optimism. I just find that there's just too much pessimism in the country, and that is not good. Things can be turned around. We can live up to the tenets of our constitution. We can generate a just, equitable, and honest society, and that is what all of us should be working for. I'd be happy to throw the floor open to any questions you may have for me.
Thank you very much, sir. I think you made a very brief but quite meaningful presentation about your experience when we visited Gulbarga. So we would really like to learn more from your experiences. You have been at the helm of Wipro for last, say, 40 years or plus. You must have interacted with government several times. Now,
You must have?
interacted with the government officers and all. Now, sir, tell us one very good example of your interaction where you felt that government really works. And at the same time, please tell us one example where you felt that the government is bad. So one good example, one bad example.
Unfortunately, too much of my interactions with government was on commercial issues. But I did work with the leadership in our country, particularly over the past 7-8 years, on issues of basic education in the country. And I found they listened. I found in some instances they acted, which is a good example. I found that the mess which the previous government created, knowingly, including all the corrupt acts which they were committing, knowingly, was very, very depressing. I think to the credit of the current government, at least at the top, there is a higher sense of integrity, significantly higher sense of integrity, which gives me hope that we will perhaps turn around some of the extreme corruption which we have seen at the top. Because the top sets the example, the top sets the leadership. If the top is clean, what is below the top tends to be cleaner. Not lily white, but tends to be cleaner.
So basically what you're saying is that the leadership is very important and that's what decides the future. So if I may just ask you, sir, means in your philanthropy for development, various sectors were open to you. You could have gone for health, you could have gone for women empowerment. Why did you choose education?
Because I think it's fundamental to the building the society. It's absolutely fundamental. It's fundamental for liberating the girl child in terms of our education, in terms of her self-confidence, in terms of her position in society. And you know, the very interesting correlations. A higher educated mother, even up to standard 6, standard 7, has a smaller family. I mean, you see the correlations amazingly. In Kerala has the lowest birth rate because the people have the highest per capita education. Chennai follows because the people have a higher per capita, education and the rest of India. So that's one area you tackle, is that you prevent a overpopulation of the country. Two is a better educated mother is more conscious of primary health care, and she's been able to absorb the subsidies of government on primary health care better. Again, there are various studies on this. So really you're killing three birds with one stone. That's the reason we chose
That's very well said, sir. If I may add that Kerala health indicators are really matching European standards with our level of incomes. So that really is, fortifies what you say, sir. So if I may ask you, sir, means you have been in the corporate sector, we are from the government sector. It's said that management is different from governance. Governance is a different cup of tea, management is a different cup of tea. There can't be similarities between management and government. Do you think it's correct, or both have some underlying principles which are just common?
No, management is distinct from government, you're saying?
From governance.
But management has also got a very strong component of governance.
Absolutely.
I don't think you can divorce management from governance. And the higher standards of governance you have in an organization, it makes for more respected management.
See, in your organization, I think you must have really inculcated several values, and that's why the organization has grown and today it has risen to become the leading one in the world. What were these values and how were these inculcated as organizational values?
By practicing them.
By practicing.
Yes,
And
because you have to practice them consistently without exception. You can talk any values, you can write any values, but unless you consistently, without any breaches, practice them. And when the breach happens, you take action. You take absolutely ruthless action. And it's just not a matter of cheating on money. It's a matter of not walking the talk of the values.
Absolutely.
We've emphasized that from a very small origin of being a 5 crore company to being now today a
$10 billion plus.
$8 billion plus company. And we've been very consistent in that. Our values are quite simple. It is respect for the individuals. It is being sensitive to the various cultures we operate in. And it's an uncompromising emphasis on integrity of character. It's completely non-compromisable. And that has really been our fundamental approach in everything which we do, is that we do not compromise on integrity.
Absolutely.
It is either black or it's white. There's no gray.
No gray area. I think most of us are impressed with your personal values, honesty, integrity, and above all, humility, sir. Means I have seen you traveling in Air India economy class. So what would be your message to us, sir? We sometimes, we are after upgrading to executive class, flying business class and all. What is your message, sir? Means at this stage, at this level, you still fly economy. But what drives you?
I fly business class internationally now, so that's not fully fair to say.
But domestically, several times I have seen you, sir. Means with just a flap on your eye, you doze off. And flying very comfortably economy class. The person sitting next to you doesn't even realize that he is so lucky to have Mr. Asim Premji sitting next to him.
So what is your question?
So the question is, what is the message for us? Don't you feel that humility is something which all of us should excel in?
But maybe I've got a lot to be humble about. That's another way of looking at it.
Yes, of course, the tremendous achievements are all there, sir. So, may I ask you, you have seen, you have this new scheme, Teach for India and all those things. What is your vision for India 30 years from now? Where would we be? Whether we would be a overpopulous country and that's it, we are the #1 country in population, or we would be a knowledge power in 30 years from now?
I'm not a good visionary. If I can see where we'd be as a country 5 years from now, I think I'm doing a reasonably good job.
Yes, 5 years from now, where would we?
Some trends which we have initiated need to be reversed. I think those trends are obvious in terms of lack of tolerance for dissent. I think the Prime Minister has realized that and hopefully he will correct himself on that. But I think to his credit, he's a strong administrator. he's put together a reasonably honest team at the top. He has established the image of India internationally, which is of a different class now, a positive class. I think the mistakes which he has made is over-promising. If he can promise a little less and deliver a little more, I think it will make for his credibility very seriously. I hope there's no media present here.
No, that's quite right.
Yes, I'm very sensitive.
So let me ask you something about the IAS, the Indian Administrative Service. Now, IAS today is under tremendous attack. He's saying that this is a vestige of the colonial rule. We are generalist administrators. We know less and less of more and more till we know nothing about everything. Now, in today's scenario, you have been running an organization which is as big as a government. Do you think a generalist service like IAS has a role?
But the nature of the responsibilities you have force you to be a generalist. I think you all can be more effective in your jobs if you all have a longer tenure in each of the jobs. There's just too much rotation taking place. So by the time you've really started getting depth in a particular area, you're transferred out of that area. And we've had experience with education, where officers in education, which is a fairly specialized area, get transferred every 18 months, 24 months. So you get generalists in education, which is not the way an education department should be built. You get sometimes generalists coming into finance, which is not the way the finance department in the government should be built. So I think you should be able to moderate in the IAS longer tenures in jobs. And what is a longer tenure? I think a 5 to 7 year tenure in a job in an area is essential for a person to get depth.
And that would also give the domain specialization of the domain knowledge, and that's how things would be better. So we can request the audience if they have some questions, and please. Mr. Shivanand, please.
You made a statement that northeastern Karnataka, the impression you got, the public schools, government schools are doing fairly well. The example you quoted was, yes, compared to private schools. Of course, nowadays, the impression government is a lot of government schools are forced to close, mainly because the controversy in the medium instructions. In the medium instruction, because today, most of the people would prefer to put their children for the English medium, for the employment opportunity or the status conscious and so on and so forth, apart from other various reasons. So I want to know your views. What exactly you felt regarding the medium instruction? What exactly is the comment?
On the medium of instruction?
The school English.
I think for a child to learn, his mother tongue is very important. So if the child is in Karnataka, being able to get an education in Kannada is very important, because the child is able to absorb more of the values of the education. But I think Karnataka is fairly progressive in the sense that now they're mandating English learning from standard 1. I think the problem here is that you do not have competent teachers who speak English. So the first area of improvement should be that teachers who teach English should know English and cannot teach it in Kannada. I think that's important. We find we spend most of our time with teachers, because the biggest influencer on a child's learning is the teacher. And the biggest influence on the teacher learning is the head teacher. So we spend a lot of time with teachers, we spend a lot of time with head teachers, we spend a lot of time with state functionaries who work with the teachers as a routine of their jobs. And the need which we find the strongest with the teachers is teachers more English. It gives us more self-confidence, it gives us more access to information on the internet, it gives us more self-learning. So now we are trying to redirect these teacher learning centers which we run to also give more accelerated training to the teachers in English. But the biggest handicap in the government schools is availability of teachers in English.
Yes, sir.
And that's a very important criteria for people to migrate from government schools to private schools. Not that the private schools teach very good English, but they certainly emphasize it much more than the government schools. Because it's the only national language which we have. It gives the child mobility within the country, gives the child mobility outside the country. So it's naturally an aspirational language for every mother and every father for the child.
Myself, my husband is in the IAS. I'm not an IAS person, but I'm going to be digressing from the topic, keeping in mind the subject for today, which is philanthropy for development, or philanthropy goes with development. Now, my question to you, sir, will be that with all the philanthropy, with all the good intentions of individuals who want to contribute, there is, I see, very little development which happens, and I know the handicapping conditions that philanthropists do face. Now, I have been looking at the disaster in Chennai for the last so many weeks. This could well happen to Bangalore. It could happen in the next year or 5 years later. Where is the development which solely we depend on the government to give us that kind of development? We live in a kind of a fairly good elite area, my husband and I, we're just the two of us here. But we have lived in the US, I have worked there, and the kind of contrast that I see in terms of just an attitude towards keeping the area clean. It's a simple thing. I mean, I know this is not the focus, what you have been talking about education and all that, but it really bothers me, and I've been thinking about it, that we could face the same situation 2 or 3 years down the road where our manholes are all clogged, there is no way that water can, and where is the government looking into all of this? And the philanthropists cannot really do much by just pouring in money unless the government is committed and dedicated in that direction. So how do we solve this problem? That's my question.
You know, I think the community needs to get much more active. The community needs to get active in terms of, they have to devote money to that. They can devote time, energy, and their personal commitment to it. I think the community should use the options available on the Right to Information Act to put back pressure on the government. And I think the community should agitate where government is not performing its tasks. You know, one of the areas which we do in education is teach the local communities to demand their rights. And the rights are very simple. You know, the government is bound by law to give a free midday meal. Majority of states give 2 eggs a week, or they give 2 glasses of milk a week. And in many cases, the community is agitated that the schools do not give the milk or the 2 eggs. It's a simple thing, but they have a recourse in terms of agitating about it. And they have authorities which are duty bound to give them a reply within a certain period of time. So the community has to get more active in terms of their time, in terms of their priorities. And they need to get more aggressive with government in terms of demanding their rights, in terms of what government is obligated to. Philanthropists, when people like me are right at the top, you know, we try to do whatever we can, but it's the grassroots which really makes a difference, which is now why we have started supporting extraordinary NGOs who are doing extraordinarily good work in areas of community necessity. Unfortunately, the government is choking their funds and painting everyone with a black paint, which I think is a very retrograde step.
Yes, please.
On education, I mean, related to education, I have got one question. In the schools, we have seen with our children and grandchildren that there is a lot of emphasis on the discipline within the school. They have to move in an orderly fashion and all that. Very good. It must be there. What I notice, sir, is that the sense of discipline of an individual vis-a-vis the society or towards the society is not emphasized at all. Should something not be done in that side? Because lot of problems, in my personal view, will get solved if that sense of discipline and sense of responsibility of individual towards the society, vis-a-vis the society, is inculcated and ingrained into the minds right from the childhood. So you mentioned about 1.5 hours time taken from your office to this place. We all are feeling that. What I used to take 24 minutes or 25 minutes today takes 55 to 65 minutes. The problems are known about the roads and the traffic chaos. The solutions are known. What in your opinion is holding back implementation of those solutions? Problems are very simple. The road conditions, the building of roads, etc. The corruption involved, etc. The total indiscipline among the commuters. These are two basic things. Solutions are known, how to do it. But what in your opinion is holding back from improving things?
No, I think one of the fundamental tenets of education is to build the right values in children. And the reason we direct our efforts so much towards the teachers is that the teacher really inculcates the values in the children. And the parents inculcate the values in the children. We are not active with the parents because we don't have that reach, we don't have that access. But we certainly have that access to the teachers. And we emphasize value training in schools from standard 1 onwards, that the teacher sets the right example. And teachers are responsible about that responsibility in terms of what they do with their classroom children. So if the schools of a higher quality, the teachers of a higher quality, it follows that the students who they teach will come out with a higher quality. And so far as the roads of Bangalore are concerned, I think the issue is not just absence of funds. Funds can be raised, and I think it is a question of lack of execution horsepower and execution determination of governments. And too much politicking, taking up too much time of all the governments.
Can we have the next question, please? Yes, sir.
So bringing you back to the issue of philanthropy, I was wondering in the morning, the philanthropy is a very complicated word. It looks like some surgical operation. Giving it away is the same number of letters, actually, I calculated. Do you think that, you also said, it's a very beautiful word you said, philanthropy, right at the top, we are there, but is there in other countries, there are a lot of philanthropy from the middle class, we realize, especially in European countries, a lot of middle class people contribute for causes. Is there anything which is holding up our society in going in the direction, number one? Number two, this kind of forced philanthropy by the government in terms of a corporate social responsibility brought in by your statute, do you think it has helped? Number two. Number three, we look at philanthropy not for money. We look for philanthropy in the kind of work that you're doing for stake building. When somebody gives the money, he also ensures that the money is properly spent. So how can more stake building be done by middle class for the kind of problems that you have just now enumerated? Would you think that the government can be sensitized by middle class philanthropy?
You know, a very good example of the generosity of the middle class is exemplified in the funding of Greenpeace and Amnesty. 90%, 80% of their funds are from small donations. Therefore, they will never die. Whatever government does, they will never die, is because the more the government attacks them, the more they are able to raise funds from the middle class. Because the middle class believes that they are contributing towards society. So it's a matter of being able to market yourself to the middle class in terms of the right electronic channels to be able to raise donations, including on a sustaining basis. Many of the middle class subscribe to commit, say, 1,000 rupees a year, or 100 rupees a year, or 2,000 rupees a year, depending upon their capacities, for a period of 5 years. It's just not a one-off donation. So what we are trying to do is some of the larger NGOs, we are trying to train for them to become more self-sustaining because of the choke of foreign funds which is happening in our country, to be able to raise money from the middle class, because that is a source which will not dry up. If anything, it will keep increasing. A second source is that we are finding in terms, I had a philanthropy initiative for India on which we are having our annual meeting tomorrow. It's basically to get rich people to get more involved in donating and adding their managerial capacity towards their donations for doing good. We have been moderately successful, but it's a very long drawn out plan. I think our experience is that the newer generation is more generous. Once they have been able to establish either a organization which is philanthropic, which is able to run professionally without too much of their overseer, because the younger generation which is very successful in business is very extended on time. So unless they create an organization which runs it for them on a professional basis, they're not able to establish the bandwidth to do it. But our experience is that they will prove to be far more generous than the older generation. Why? One is because the older generation today is now locked into various claims on their wealth from various constituents in their families. Two is they still believe that they have to leave all their wealth to their children, which the younger generation does not believe in, fortunately. And therefore, they're very locked into preserving all their wealth to give to their children, their children's children, and there are many claims for it because the family wealth has been split among many family members. Does that answer your question?
I think just to take it forward, sir, in India we have got very strong family ties, but very weak societal ties. Now say for example, as a family, I would like to build property for my next generation, second generation, third generation. Entire effort goes towards that. Let's look at the United States, sir. Now there, the biggest institutions are philanthropic institutions. Look at Howard, look at the Smithsonian. Now why don't we have something similar here also? As you rightly said, the newer generations, these things will happen. Now I would really not prefer to leave my wealth only for my children. I would like to do something for the society. So that what it says is that the middle class philanthropy is taking over now. Next question, please. Yes, ma'am.
So I am the wife of an IAS officer, but I have been in education for over 30 years. I have taught students from 3 years to 20 years, have been a principal of a school and a college. And right now, I am a preschool consultant to an institution, and I look after about 20 institutions in Tier 2 towns of Karnataka and Andhra. I look after only preschools, and I feel that preschools are most important as the foundation.
Which schools?
I am a consultant.
Preschools.
I'm a preschool consultant now to a group of institutions, and I find that is where the education starts. And government has, before nursery schools mushroomed like anything, but now government has said it has to be registered. I've also worked in the ICDS scheme of Anganwadis, but education doesn't take place there. And last week I was in Shimoga, Ranibennur, and Dharwad. They all want English education for the pre-primary children. Yes, I agree about Kannada, mother tongue being the medium of instruction. What is your opinion about preschool education, sir? Because you have only mentioned primary, upper, secondary, etc. And also I feel the preschool teachers should be paid just as much as the primary school teacher, because they spend a lot of time and effort with the children molding their personality. And personality development takes place from birth. And up to 90% of the intellectual level has development takes place. I'd like to know what your opinion is about preschool education and what importance should be given by the government.
The government system calls them Anganwadis.
Yes.
They don't call them preschools. We are advocating very aggressively that preschool should be part of the education system and merged with primary schooling. Because our experience also is that the value systems, the development of the child is most important during the period from 3 to 4 years onwards, which is the period in which you have the preschools. Unfortunately, preschools of the government in India belongs to the Department of Sociology, I think, not to the Department of Education, and that has to be changed. There has to be a continuum. There has to be a continuum between a preschool and a primary school and a secondary school and a higher secondary school. Because education is a continuum. It cannot be disrupted with different agencies. And the Anganwadis in India, which is the government preschools, are in shambles. They don't have decent premises. They serve substandard meals. They are completely understaffed. And the teachers there are completely incompetent. In fact, a teacher in a preschool requires to be more educated than a teacher in a primary school because she's dealing with a very delicate child. And she forms the value system and the education system of the child. So we agree with you 100% that preschools have to get higher attention. They have to get higher funding. Then, because the per capita expenditure that the government is spending on preschool, I think is something like 1/5 what it is spending on primary education, which is absurd, absolutely absurd. That point is just not getting made because of the politics involved between the two departments of the turf. But even within the turf, if leadership is exhibited at the top, I think the problem can be partially resolved. Did that answer all your questions? Because you had many questions.
No, I want to know what your foundation is doing for preschool education. You said, what I understood is it's merging with the primary school. Is that?
No, we are focusing on the primary schools because the institution of the preschool is not able to absorb the inputs. First of all, you've got to fundamentally change the quality of the teachers in the preschools. They are underpaid. There are lots of contract teachers. They are paid 1/3 the salaries of a standard school teacher. That fundamental issue has to be resolved before we can really be active in that area. Because we cannot substitute government funds with our funds. I mean, that's not manageable. All we can do is focus the government funds better and use our abilities to be able to direct better usage of the government funds. But the preschool is a fundamental problem. It has to be attacked like yesterday.
Okay. Hello, sir. I'm obviously not an IAS officer, and my father is. I felt obligated to introduce myself. And so I noticed in your speech that you, in your speech that you said that positivity as an attitude is pretty important, especially in the context of Indian development. And my question isn't as concrete as in, concrete problems or solutions, but I just wonder how you do it in the face of, bad infrastructure right outside, and, like censored and sensationalized media. Like how do you manage to stay positive? Because I can't, and I don't know. I just wondering how you do it.
You build a cultivated sense of insensitivity towards things which are negative. So you look at more optimistic things.
Yes. Yes, please.
I am a retired officer of the Indian Administrative Service. Over 30 years ago, I happened to be associated with the drafting of the Karnataka Education Act. It is probably the only education act in this country in which, at the insistence of the educationists who were on the select committee to which it went, we copied and slightly expanded the fundamental duties of citizens, which is enshrined in the Constitution, into the Education Act. The hope was that the curriculum for training teachers and later imparting education through textbooks in schools and so on would inculcate in the students awareness about the fundamental duties, which include a lot of things, protection of heritage, scientific temper, and so on. I wanted to know whether in your experience with teacher training, whether such inculcation has been done, sensitizing the teachers about this, who can teach it to the students so that they become good citizens of this country.
You know, the government is redrafting the entire education policy. There's a massive exercise on, starting from the grassroots, from a community level, going right up to the state level and aggregation at the state level and participation of the states in redrafting this policy. We're extremely involved in this and very active in this, apart from being on the apex committee of the government. What is very interesting is how sound the previous policy was. I think the policy is not ineffective. It's the implementation of the policy which has been ineffective. And you go back further, you appreciate how strong the Constitution of India was, or is, in terms of the vision of the drafters of the Constitution. It is absolutely amazing. Each time we go into it, we are more and more impressed of the vision of the drafters of the Constitution. They have seen all the contingencies, they have been able to forecast how changes are taking place, and they are able to establish a bedrock of values in the Constitution.
I think we can.
Officer, the worst kind there is, because there's nothing we can really do, but there's a lot of shouting we try to do, or a lot of inward frustration which we manifest from time to time. But this is not the occasion for that. Let me just focus on one thing. That is, we are used to covering lot of frailties, defects, problems in the way we are implementing various schemes, including those in education. I would like that we start on a different note. We mean not necessarily this audience, but the country. And that note should be positive. The positivity of the note should be, how can we improve things? What are the instruments of change which we can bring about? I give you only two examples. One is not in the field of education, one is in the field of education. In the non-education sector, for years and years and years, when I was growing up and in the early years of my service, everywhere there were complaints that cattle farmers were not getting their due, that milk was not available, that this was not there, that was not there. So many problems. I must say most of it there has been a quietus. And the one man I hold responsible for this sea change in the rural dairy economy is Dr. Kurian, whom of course on a separate note I have always felt he should have been a Bharat Ratna recipient, and I still hope even posthumously he will get it. Because the way he has transformed that part of the Indian rural economy and the Indian consumer economy is unparalleled. There are people who can draw lessons from that. Similarly, in the education field, I think we can take lessons from excellent work done by some of the missionary societies, not necessarily Christian, many Hindu societies, many Muslim societies, in bringing about an educational transformation in the children with whom they deal. Of course, they are a limited population. It's not the whole state or the whole country. But I think we draw lessons from the way they approach the task of education. I think that is what is important. The Ramakrishna Mission in Chennai, for example, the way they teach their children, everything from the ABCs until discipline and sports and whatnot. So I think in doing anything, and I'm sure your foundation is more than capable of tackling this, in taking care of this, what we have to see is, where do we build in the instruments of change? Not only just complaining that everything is going wrong, no. Even government schools can change appreciably for the better if some of these things are done. So my request to the foundation, if I may say so, is that these aspects should be taken, and case studies of successful examples of how such a change has been brought about should be taken up and teachers should use those materials like case study in business in order to bring about the required changes in the system.
In fact, this is a very interesting suggestion. We have now started making videos, very simple videos, done by our staff who have been trained in making videos of examples of success in education, example of change successes in education. And we are now building a library which we are going to give to every teacher as case studies, which she can use in her classroom for communication, because classrooms have TVs. Classrooms also have computers which don't work, but they have TVs which work because it's a simpler equipment in terms of its maintenance. I'm a great admirer of Mr. Kurian, Dr. Kurian. I knew him quite well. The reason he probably didn't get a Bharat Ratna is he didn't do enough kushamat to our political masters. And I used to have lunch with him every year, with him and his wife. And one day there was a call from the finance minister for him. And he told his bearer, please tell the finance minister I'm having lunch, he can call back later. So he didn't give a damn for any political masters, and that's the reason he was not popular in the political system. And the political system decides who gets the awards, which are from the common man. One example is Give India. Give India does an absolutely first-rate job and a very honest job. And they take money from small donations and they funnel it to NGOs which are doing extremely good work. So one would very strongly recommend you look at organizations like Give India to be able to encourage people to give small donations. We are adequately funded vis-a-vis our corpus and our endowment. We do not require funds. Our biggest challenge is to be able to scale fast enough to be able to absorb the income of our endowment. It's a very large endowment. It's more than 50,000 crores.
Yes.
I am an IAS officer. Actually, I was wishing to seek your view on the point. One change which has come about, for example, today in education system is that when I ask her who is topper in your class, she doesn't know. And generally, traditionally, we used to have like in a school system, the toppers, the who's doing the best in the class, etc. But right now the shift is that nobody shall fail, one, that is okay. Additionally, nobody is even told who is doing the best in the class right up to 10th class. And what is your view about this kind of a change, that you don't have somebody being celebrated for excellence in his or her academic achievements right up to, I don't know, throughout the education system?
I'm not sure I've understood your question.
So my question is your views on the fact that today we are moving towards an egalitarian or a different education system where somebody who does very well in academics in the class is not identified as being the best student in the class.
You're saying person who does exceptionally well in academics cannot perform in society?
No, sir. I am saying that in our school, we were declaring children as first in the class, second in the class, third in the class. But today, my daughter doesn't know who is topper of the class. Everybody is equal in that sense.
His question is that in the olden days, a lot of competition, who is first in class, that was the emphasis. In the new system, the emphasis is not on test and evaluation, but on real academic inputs. So, which is the better system?
I would assume that the new system is a better system.
That answers his question. I can see a half hand going up.
Sir, I would like to, from you, what is the motivation for your philanthropy? You answered it in a bit when you said that the older generations of people used to keep the money for their children. What made you reverse that decision which most people, most corporate leaders of your generation were doing?
I think I consider myself in very simple terms as a trustee of wealth, not as an owner of wealth, and that makes a fundamental difference. Two is I inculcated these values from my parents. So I owe the credit for this to my parents. The simple answer.
Yes, sir.
I am Dr. Ashwath, sir. My question to you is, we have got 3 types of syllabus. One is ICIC, another is CBSE, another is state syllabus. Now, we are making a bifurcation, a disparity between rural students and urban students. A student who has come from CBSE, ICSE, and a student who has come from rural areas, the standard differs in rural areas, and the standard and curriculum syllabus differs to a student of CBSE and ICSE. How to bring uniformity? Do you want to ensure that the disparity should continue, or they should be brought to the rural students that are brought to the mainstream of the society, and they also should be made competent to compete with the students of CBSE and ICSE? Whether government of India or the state government is going to have a training program for the rural students separately? This is my question.
Let me request my colleague who's here, Anurag Bihar, who's the Vice Chancellor of our university, to answer this question. Because I think I'm not competent to answer this question because I'm very confused with the state of affairs. Anurag, why don't you have a shot at it? Where are you? Yeah, go ahead. No, just answer it. I think other people have a high sense of curiosity.
I think, and what I'm going to say might seem counterintuitive in the face of the reality that we see, but my sense is that on the matter of curriculum, all state curriculums have also made significant progress. So it's not as though the curriculum is in any way limiting. So if you look at CBSE, I have at least a few friends that I have worked with from the state government here, and they're, I think, very familiar with this, that the curriculum in this country, whether it's CBSE or the Karnataka state curriculum or the Bihar state curriculum has made significant progress. The issue is significantly more about how that curriculum is getting transacted in the classroom. And therefore, I have never felt, and he's kindly given me the opportunity to respond to this question. This is my job, this is all what I live for. I haven't felt that the Karnataka state curriculum is wanting in any way. It's a lot more about how does one, and when I'm saying that, one should also understand that all curriculums can be improved. Everything can be improved in life. So I'm not making a contention that this is perfect. So I think it's not that the CBSE or ICSE or the Karnataka state curriculum is holding anything back. It's about how are we implementing. I know CBSE schools which are much worse off than Karnataka state curriculum schools. So there's a wide variation. Essence of it is, this is the point that I think he's been making from the beginning of the session. Our understanding, our experience across every state is that if we could focus on the teachers and if we can build the capacity of the teachers adequately, not only when they're in service, because all the conversation has right now been about once the teachers are in service. Actually, what we are forgetting is the extraordinary amount of preparation that is required to become teachers. The entire B.Ed, D.Ed system. So that's what I would say. Mr. Premji, maybe you should say something about the B.Ed, D.Ed thing. Yeah. Across the country. It's across the country. It's across the country. Yeah. Sir, I'll respond. You're absolutely right. So the point I'm making, sir, is that the difference is not coming in from whether the curriculum is ICSE or CBSE. The difference is coming from what we are able to do or not able to do in different kinds of schools, right? So it's not really just a curricular difference.
I think that the question has been answered. Let's not go into a debate. Yes, Mr. Tagore.
You know, there are 16,000 licensed education institutions in India who are enabled to give education degrees. 90% of them don't have a physical premise. And the government is doing nothing about this. They are shams, they are in the real estate game, they are in the capitation game of taking capitation for giving degrees. First thing which the government should do is close these down and take penal actions against them. Canada produces 20,000 teachers a year. We produce 2,000 teachers a year. Can you imagine that? First thing that the government should do is the good universities owned by the government should have a Department of Education qualified to give a B.Ed degree and an M.Ed degree. That's the most fundamental thing. They can set up these departments within the next 18 months. If the government can set up 50 IITs of reasonable quality within the time period, they can surely give an emphasis to setting up education institutions, education departments within government institutions. We need good teachers and we need good qualified teachers. We don't need sham teachers. Fortunately today, the entrance tests for teachers which have been established by the government have now a pass rate of only 3%, which means they are strict enough to ensure that the new cadre of teachers which are coming onto government payrolls are of a certain quality. And we are focusing on these teachers because they are unspoiled, they are bright, they are enthusiastic and they are dedicated.
Can I have the last two questions, please?
I am Srinivasan. Do you have this education mission in any other state? How does it compare to the experience in Karnataka?
Your mission, is it confined to Karnataka or in other states also you
No,
have?
we are in 7 states.
So how does it compare to the situation in Karnataka?
You know, we have been working in Karnataka right from day one. So our inputs into Karnataka have been significantly higher than our inputs into the majority of the other states which we entered subsequently. Uttarakhand we have been again working for a long period. So one would say Karnataka is a little ahead of Uttarakhand. Bihar we have just entered when Nitish Kumar became Chief Minister because he gave education priority. Fortunately he is back now and hopefully with the current government he'll be again able to give education priority. But it varies. Plus, you know, we have what we know as district institutes. We have today about 20 of them. Within the next 2 years, we'll have about 50 of them. And the 50 will engage one way or the other with up to about 15 million children. So it's a very scaled program. Our biggest challenge is to recruit good people. And we're now recruiting people from universities as fellows and as employees who we require minimum 2 years training to be effective in the field. And that is also, they are half-baked, but they are still responsible in the field. We're not able to scale up fast enough because we're not able to get trained people fast enough. So we have to build our own people. So we have what is known as startup districts, where we have to give a lot of support from the mature district in order for them to get effective.
Last question, please. Mr. Tagore.
Good evening, sir. This is Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore from IPS. I wanted to know, where were you educated, your primary education? Was it in government school or a private school? Second, education does not make a man happy. It normally makes him very clever, many a times to commit mischief. That is what I have realized after serving Bijapur and Gulbarga districts. People are extremely good there, but they are not highly educated. Don't you think that academic qualification or the curricula, what we are talking about, is not the only important thing? It is the overall development, maybe developing self-confidence in the field of sports or art or culture or other activities in addition to academic qualification. Because you may, anybody can correct me, most of the successful people in IAS, IPS and other competitive fields, they are all from the rural area and most of them from the government schools. Correct me if I am wrong. did you get your education, primary education, in a government school?
So what is your specific question?
Did you get your education, primary education, in a government school? Has it motivated you to take up these government schools that we have to improve the standards there? One. Second, only academic qualification is important in the life, or beyond that, extracurricular activities, exposure to student in the outside world?
No, there's no question that only academics does not make for a developed child. There's no question about that. In fact, we are doing very interesting things in our school now, which we're encouraging the government to duplicate. There's an assembly session in the morning in a school. Typically, it goes on for 15-20 minutes. We have started experimenting with skits developed by the children for this 15-20 minute session. So they put up a demonstration in the first 20 minutes. 2-3 things. It makes the boys and the girls integrate. Otherwise, you'll find in government schools, the boys sit on one side, the girls sit on the other side. It makes them integrate. 2, it gives them a lot of self-confidence of being able to use their imagination to put up skits. 2-3 skits every morning. They work on the previous night, the previous week, the previous month to be able to demonstrate them. It just makes for a very rounded approach to building their self-confidence. Why do we operate only in government schools? Is because we believe that